It's
Oh,
working.
geez. Okay, now I know how this works.
Mute you, Hannah. We can hear you. All right. We're ready to rock. Welcome, everybody, to this amazing call, How to Heal Trauma and Stress in the Body with Danielle Sadhana Sokol, all the way from Brazil. What's up, Danielle?
Hello, hello. Thank you so
Welcome,
much for
welcome. I am going to just make sure that my Facebook page is closed because I'm hearing some feedback and that's on me. Okay, we're back. So we're going to cover a rad call today. I want to hear from all of you guys tuning in here live on Zoom. Good morning. Welcome. If you guys are tuning in live on the Facebook group, The Next Evolution of You, good morning. Jump in the chat. Let us know where you're calling in from so that we can say hello. This is going to be an interactive call. And we're going to really just like jump in and have a really juicy conversation. Many of you may know or not know, in the last 2 years, I've gone through quite a radical healing journey myself, moving, getting divorced, meeting love again, separation, revamping my business, loss of identity, and really diving into the inner work, specifically healing trauma in the body. And it was a whole new arena that I had never really looked at. And so I wanted to bring this really important conversation with you. Welcome, Danielle. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about how you got into trauma work, healing? How are you living in Brazil? Hello, living your best life. Like, tell us all the things.
Okay, so I guess I'll back up a little bit and introduce myself just a little bit to all of you. So my name is Danielle, Danielle Sadhana Sokol. Sadhana is a meditation name. Danielle is my legal name. I'm from New York City, but I live in Brazil. I've been living here for maybe 12 years on and off at this point. I came to Brazil the first time because I was studying anthropology, right? And I fell in love with Brazil. I spent 6 months in the Amazon, which for a person that grew up in New York City, going to the Amazon, that was a completely life-changing experience. And I decided that I wanted to spend more time in Brazil. Later on in my life, I came back when I was like 24. And I ended up moving to Rio. That's where I'm based at the moment, in Rio de Janeiro. And how did I get into trauma work? It's a big question, right? It's a big question. But if I were to sum it up into a little bit of a story, when I was in my mid-20s, I ended up getting into a unhealthy relationship, an abusive relationship. And it was abusive physically and emotionally. And it was a very, very dark time at that point in my life. I was very young and I was far from my network of friends and family. I was living in Brazil at that point. And I ended up staying in this relationship for a bit too long. And when I finally was able to get some space and to actually end this relationship, I started asking myself these big questions, like why did I end up, in a relationship like this? Why would I stay with a person, like this when there was all these red flags? Why wasn't I seeing all of these red flags, and I started doing some serious soul searching at that point, and I started to get into self-development work, and I really dived into everything to figure out who I was, because I realized I have no idea who I am. I know what I don't want, I know I don't want to be in a relationship like the one I just was in, but I don't know why I got into this relationship, and I also don't know what I really want to do with myself. So I realized I didn't know who I was. So I started, getting really into meditation, into dance, into bioenergetics, expressive arts therapy. And then eventually, I started going deeper and deeper. And then I ended up getting into somatic experiencing, which I'm trained in, and different types of techniques that really deal with the body. So I started getting more interested in my physical body and how my body was, storing different types of trauma. And obviously, I realized at that point, my relationship was only a reflection of other things that I had lived earlier on in my life. So
Oh, we're going to talk about that. That really is the key, the doorway into real healing. And I love this conversation. Let us know if you're tuning in, whether live in the Facebook or you're catching the replay, maybe on YouTube, or you're here in the Zoom. I think everyone's been through a, toxic relationship. I know this book, Take Your Power Back Now, the movement that was created, a multi-million-dollar women's empowerment movement, was created by me doing the same thing, looking in and saying, how did I create this? Taking radical responsibility and making, a decision to heal everything in my life in the next year, to really take a deep dive in. So kudos for your courage and your willingness, right? To move out of this victim state and into like inquiry. How did I contribute to this? So I'm going to invite you guys to drop any questions you have for Danielle. Drop them here in the chat, drop them in the Facebook group. But like, what are some of the tips or the steps that are important in getting over, let's say, one of these toxic relationships? Like, can you walk us through this, this journey of how you took your power back now and started a career in healing, in somatic work, in creative expression, and all those things?
Yeah, I think in terms of relationships, one of the things, and this is my personal experience I'm basing it on, but also some other clients that I've worked with that have had similar kind of situations, because it's interesting how we often attract people as clients that have had similar life experiences. And normally they don't know my life experience, but somehow we resonate, we attract one another. So something that I've noticed, one of the first things that's really important is admitting that you're in an unhealthy relationship, right? And for many people, for myself, it was really hard to admit that, and to verbalize it and to actually share that with someone. Because once you verbalize it and you share it with, your friend or a family member or whoever it is, or your therapist, and you explain to them what's going on, often what that means is they're going to hold you accountable, right? So this is really important, is to be able to find someone that you feel safe with, that you can be vulnerable with, because it's super vulnerable, and it's not something that necessarily everyone deserves to know, but if there's somebody that you feel like you can really trust, and that's a supportive person in your life, hopefully you have that. If you don't have that, that's something to think about as well.
I think that's really key, because we're talking about shame. We're talking about shame, like toxic shame, There's a difference between guilt and shame, but keeping, I like to talk about taking the secrets and moving them into the sacred by sharing your truth with love, with somebody, with the community, with a therapist, with, and I wouldn't recommend like friends, because you could just sit there and kind of go, around and around in some kind of a circle with a friend, and talk, victim loop doesn't go anywhere. But definitely bringing the secret into the sacred, sharing that so that it doesn't.
Bring it into the light. Exactly.
So that's the first step.
Yeah. This idea of shame that you brought up, right? Shame, it grows, right? In the darkness and when we don't talk about it, when it's not shared, and So if you can, I love that, bring it into, the sacred, and be able to talk about it with someone that you trust. I think that's really important. So one is actually verbalizing it. I think that's really important. Something else that's important, I think, is being able to connect with yourself, because normally when we find ourselves in a very toxic relationship, for example, and that could also be, a toxic relationship in a work environment, but I'm specifically talking about an intimate relationship, right? Where maybe there's harm involved and things like that. Normally, to be able to deal with that, we start disconnecting from ourselves, right? We disconnect from our body, right? To be able to actually stay in that relationship, so we have to disconnect from ourselves. So one of the things I think is really important is to start to connect with yourself again, connect with your body, connect with your feelings, because normally when we start to connect with ourselves more deeply, we're going to start to feel, right, how we're negating ourselves to be with that person, perhaps.
And I've done that. I have done this. I'm like, hey, look at me. I'm a women's empowerment leader, made a ton of money, wrote books, helped thousands of
Yeah.
women. Okay. And was abandoning myself to keep love close to me. So when you really dive into this whole shadow work, inner child, and hope we get into, talking about some of this, but this is the big, I'm just going to like pause, put like a highlighter.
Yeah.
Let's talk about
Yeah.
this, because we're raised in society of like, oh, Prince Charles comes on his gleaming white horse and is supposed to complete you and supposed to like love all the broken parts of you and make you whole. No, actually, it doesn't work that way. You become whole. You fill yourself up with the love of God. You do you love you, and you meet that reflection in the outer world. And I think, fairy tales, I mean, they're getting a lot better now. The cartoons are getting way better.
Yeah.
We have like Shrek, and they're getting way better. But I grew up on like Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, and I'm like 43.
Sleeping Beauty.
Sleeping Beauty, right? All of these crazy stories that really teach women to give their power away. And I know, when I started really diving into this, looking at the ways, and this is like all unconscious stuff, right? We're not, hopefully I show you guys my own soft, pink, imperfect, vulnerable underbelly, because my mission really with empowering women is always to hold a safe space for really important conversations where women can be seen and heard and bring this stuff to the light, right? So it doesn't control our lives anymore. And I just think there's a lot of conversation around this part where we, in a toxic relationship, you disassociate from yourself, you numb out your feelings in hopes that this person over here, that's the unconscious agreement, right? This person over here is gonna love me, do this for me, do that for me. Codependent relationships. There's a codependent, there's a narcissist. They're both the same thing. They're both the expression of, can you talk a little bit about that?
What I would say when you said that, what came up for me is, for me in my personal life, I've had a little bit of an anxious attachment style in many relationships and have had some codependency, and where does that come from? When I was a kid, for me to feel valued in my house, I needed to be able to fix the problem, that was kind of where my value came. And my father was sick, and has a lot of mental health issues. There's a lot of issues. My house was a chaotic place, so I needed to fix things to make it better, right? And then what happened later on in life, that same pattern obviously repeated itself, and then I was trying to find partners that I could fix, and nobody needs to be fixed. And now looking back, right, it's not about fixing, but it was like people became my projects, my partners became my projects, and that created this, sort of codependent relationship where I was solving their problems, so I was needed, right? And then,
so that's how we get significance. The personality needs significance, but these are unhealthy ways to get it. And they're just unconscious. We have these different attachment styles: anxious attachment, ambivalent attachment, avoidant attachment. And then we go in relationship that mirror our primary attachments. So for me, I love this conversation. I'm going to like tell all the things, right?
Tell all the things.
Yeah, tell all the things. For me, it was rescuing, right? Rescuing my dad, rescuing my mom, and also caretaking. Yeah. So I got married and I rescued my ex-husband and his 3 kids. They needed a lot of rescuing. It was a perfect project, right? Only it doesn't fulfill you. It doesn't, you live out this cycle. So if you are in relationships and this is happening with you, and you seem to keep having, having the same patterns, or you keep getting triggered, right? This is really the opportunity to do some investigation, some inner work to find out, why that is. I think our relationships are our biggest teachers.
Yeah, big mirrors. They show us a lot about ourselves.
Yeah, sorry, I cut you off. You were telling your story, and I got excited. So you were talking about when you were a kid, this is, you were
Listen,
fixing.
listen.
Oh, and I'm going to put everybody on mute here just to make sure that we have a clean recording. So if you are coming on, just, I'll just keep an eye on. So you were talking about, patterns that get started in childhood with our primary attachment figures, our parents, if you could fix things in your life, then it meant you were worthy and valuable. This is how you got significance. This is how you got seen and heard. This is how you kept love. Like, we're kids, we need to survive, right? Mom and dad are,
they're all survival mechanisms. So many of these things are survival mechanisms. Even when, you mentioned, before, this idea of disassociating from yourself to stay in this relationship or something like that. It's a survival mechanism. Our nervous system is super intelligent. It might not be, the greatest mechanism at the moment, but it's trying to help you, right? And we learn to use certain, survival systems as kids, and we end up repeating it if we don't, do this kind of inner work and searching and understanding. But about
made by a child. This is to bring kindness, compassion, care, and grace to yourself as you're in this healing journey. It was a survival tactic that was decided upon by a 9-year-old or a 6-year-old or a 3-year-old, and so now you're an adult, you have the opportunity to learn a new strategy, to go back and repair that, to discover a new strategy, to make some new standards, to move through that process of standards to serenity, to go through this healing journey. But it involves facing these really core feelings, which are, holy shit, really, really rough. Most people, I think, and I'll talk, I'll share about myself, human beings are so terrified of feelings, but they pass within 90 seconds, and I remember feeling like, oh my gosh, if I, pull the top off of that pressure cooker, I just may never stop hurting, right? These really deep core painful feelings like unworthiness or heartbreak, loneliness, hopelessness over, how people behaved or didn't behave in your family. Things, and let's talk a little bit about trauma and how it actually gets stored in the body, because it doesn't necessarily have to be a rape, although that's pretty traumatic, or held at gunpoint, that's super traumatic. But trauma could also be a parent that was sick, a divorce, parents that were not whole loving adults themselves, unconscious themselves, didn't see or hear you. And so we're all these meaning making machines, right? We make it mean something about ourselves. Talk to us a little. Can you share a little bit about that? How trauma gets trapped in the body?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think what you said about rape, and being held at gunpoint, things like that, that's what a lot of people limit trauma to, right? This is this idea of the big T trauma people say nowadays, these big traumatic events in the sense of, war and this and that. And to be honest, that is extremely traumatic. There's, also the chronic big T, trauma, which is when we're talking about often abuse at home, domestic violence, that kind of thing. But then there's what we call the little T trauma. And that's, basically all these different things that can happen, which could be you lose a family member, it can be losing your job unexpectedly. It can be a ton of different things. And I think one of the things that's important to think about, and also to normalize this term trauma, because trauma is a fact of life. It happens all the time, but the idea is it's not so important. This is in the lens of somatic experiencing. This is, what Peter Levine says, who developed this approach to working with trauma and PTSD. It really doesn't matter. Not that it doesn't matter, but it's not what happens to you that matters. It's how you experience that event, right? So any experience that overwhelms your body, your thoughts, your emotions, that's too much, too fast, too soon, is trauma. Right? So it's more about how we experience something rather than what happens itself. And that's why in certain, you know, events, there might be two people that are in a car accident or something like that in the same exact event, but they experience the event completely differently. And one person might be much more traumatized than the other. So the idea is that if something is too much, too fast, too soon for our nervous system to handle, the energy of gets locked in our body, right? And this could be a real or a perceived threat, right? So it can be something that we think could happen. Sometimes it's a real event, you know, there's a car coming at us or something like that we can see. But other times it's we think someone's, you know, going to do something to us, and that can still have the same types of effects on our nervous system than a real life-threatening event, right? So the thing that's first of all super important is just to, because I know some people come to me and they say, I don't even know if I suffered trauma. I don't really remember my childhood. And, you know, I don't remember anything terrible happening. And they're normally thinking of these big T traumas, right? But being bullied at school, being humiliated, your caretaker is always late to pick you up and you feel abandoned, having a sick parent, like you said, having a parent with, you know, mental health issues that's not present, being whatever. It can be things that seem to other people super insignificant or small, but if it felt traumatic to you, it was traumatic. So I think it's like super important just to kind of validate that, because there's a lot of people that come to me and they're like, I'm not sure if it's trauma or not trauma, because it's this big word, right? And there's a lot of shame around trauma and we don't talk about it. We're starting to talk a lot more about it now, right? But in the past, we didn't talk so much about it. So the idea is what happens in these traumatic events, our nervous system is overwhelmed, right? And then our nervous system, our brain's overwhelmed and we're in survival mode, right? And so the idea is when we do this type of work, we want to get out of the fight, flight, freeze, right? To feelings of safety, which is when we're in the ventral state, right? So when we're safe, right? When we're in this ventral state of connection, we're open, right? But when we're in fight or flight, we're not open to connection, right? Or if we're in freeze, collapse, we're not open to connection. We can't connect with other people. And what happens is when we're chronically, repeatedly in these states, it gets harder and harder to get out of them. Even when, you know, I'm sure people have experienced this before, something happens, you know, and they respond in a completely exaggerated way, like, where did that come from, you know? And that might have been like a trauma trigger. So the idea is that these somatic memories get stored in our body, right? When we're not able to react in the way that we wanted to, the way that our body maybe wanted to react, or the thing that we wanted to say, or whatever it is, for some reason we weren't able to respond, and this energy gets trapped in our body. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but the idea is that when we've been, you know, through a traumatic, you know, experience, often, you know, we're not able to be completely present in the here and now, right? We're not able to function with tons of, you know, resilience and ease and spontaneity and creativity, because we often have these triggers and these stories and these narratives and these things that are going on, and sometimes it's totally, we're not even aware that it's happening, right? And, you know, sometimes we overreact or underreact to different situations. And often, if we start to investigate, you know, and to look into it, there might be unresolved trauma from the past that's locked in your nervous system and is causing you to, you know, respond in a certain way. And
I think it's really key that you mentioned it hijacks your creativity and your productivity. Absolutely does. Super. I mean, we have a big network, obviously, and an audience of entrepreneurs here. But yeah, this is, if you're really looking, you know, to take your power back now, we're right here. Presence is everything. How much of your day is spent ruminating and having conversations, or I should have said this, or I'm having this, you know, pretend conversation, or you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, or you're expecting to be betrayed again or hurt again, or whatever it is. So we have these different states of our nervous system: ventral, vaga, and what's the other one? Ventral, vaga, and
we have the sympathetic, right? The sympathetic nervous system. And then we have the dorsal state, the ventral vagal state.
Dorsal is when you're shut down, when you're in like
Exactly,
fight or flight.
collapse.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so I always look at it, you know, like if does anybody here have a pet, a dog? You know, like I have this little dog Houdini who's like, if mommy's in the room, he's going wherever mommy is, I'm right here. But you know, Houdini gets up and he shakes, right? And he like gets, ever see a dog, all they do is they get up and they shake, you know, they shake it out and they move on with their day and they get up and they shake. And so talk to us a little bit about how to process trauma, let's say when we do have it in the nervous system. What are the steps? How do you work with people to heal?
Yeah. So the shaking is great that you just brought up, because that's actually what inspired Peter Levine, who's the person that developed somatic experiencing. He was studying animals, right? And he was watching all these animals in the wild, not so much pets in our, in our homes that are domesticated, but animals in the wild that go through really life-threatening, traumatic experiences. And for some reason, they don't seem traumatized. And then he's like, then I have these humans here that are going through, let's say, less traumatic, right? There's not a lion running after them. And they seem to be super traumatized, the humans, but not the animals, right? So he started getting really interested, and he was a biologist, right? And so he was studying that, trying to figure out what's the difference, right? Like, what are animals doing that humans aren't doing? And one of the things that he noticed was the shaking, right? So this is just one example, right? But if you watch, like Discovery Channel or any of these things with animals, and you see a gazelle being chased by a lion or whatever, right? There's different things that gazelle might do, right? And one is that gazelle's gonna run as fast as it can, right? To get out of harm's way. And then if that gazelle realized that it's out of harm's way now, the lion has passed, often it will start shaking, right? Or it will run far to discharge all that energy that's in the body. Another thing that the gazelle might do is play dead, right? If the gazelle plays dead, maybe the lion will pass and won't even bother it. And then after, when it's done playing dead, again, shaking, right? So there's certain things he started to observe that animals would consistently do in these types of situations. And there were things that normally humans weren't doing, because we suppress, right? We control. We don't even show emotions half the time. It's one of for me, the greatest teachers are often little children, right? We see little kids, when they feel an emotion, normally they just express it, right? And you see that the kid's gonna like start ranting, raving, crying, stomping their feet, whatever, but then it's done.
Yeah,
right?
it's present in the moment before the child gets all of these learned behaviors and all of these
Right.
limitations and beliefs about how to behave and what's correct and what's not correct. You look at a 2-year-old, my sister's a 2-year-old, present in the moment, now happening, emotional release. Yeah.
Right. So it's this idea that, the more that we can actually be present to what's happening and not suppress sometimes what's happening. Obviously, afterwards, when we're working with trauma, it's different. One of the main things, though, that I would say, if I was to pick the main important thing with working with trauma, is restoring the sense of connection and safety, right? Because a lot of people, might not feel safe in their own bodies. They might not even feel connected to their bodies. To be honest, that's the first step, because most people that I work with, and me myself, I was super disassociated when I started doing different types of somatic work, to feel the body, right? To connect with
And
your
this
body.
is where
to
all
really
the addictions come from, right? Let me just go numb out with alcohol, with food, with cigarettes, with porn, with shopping, with working. I mean, they're overworking. Working out too much is also an addiction. This is where addiction stems. It's a place where I don't want to feel the feelings. And these are like some really deep core, like not safe, unworthy, hopeless, heartbreak, grief, loneliness. Like they're really, really big ones, so I will go do this instead. I remember when I was just waking up to this, 2 years ago, marriage, we're going on like second and third separation. And I don't have anything bad to say about my ex-husband. I don't believe that, anybody did anything intentionally. I believe we both hurt each other in our unconscious, in our unconscious space. But I remember that my body was in so much pain that I couldn't do yoga on my own. So I went to go and hire this yoga teacher here in town in Mount Shasta. And I remember leaving the yoga studio one day thinking, maybe if I got hit by a car, it'd be a really good way out of the mess that I was finding my life in. And that was like, wow, holy smokes, we got to do something here. And my sister, my ex-husband, like, go and get pills, go to a therapist and they're going to give you some pills. And I was like, no, folks, I'm a healer. I know how this is all emotional. I'm going to go inside and do the work. I'm going to strap my tits on and do the work, right? The deep inner work. And so I started with really connecting with my body, what you're talking about. I started dancing again. I started dancing in my kitchen, that's really, that's my love of embodiment and really, take your power back now is kind of transforming into this new, hey, there's more, I've always loved to dance, and whether it's yoga or movement, getting in touch with ourselves, getting in touch with the body, because it's all stored in there. That's how we shake things out, right?
Yeah. And something you were just saying about, addiction and all of that, these are all coping mechanisms, right? They're all strategies, how we were saying, like strategies, different strategies that are formed way back in your childhood, and there's certain, coping mechanisms, when there's a lot of, abuse or different things, traumatic things happening in your home, numbing out, whatever, then later on addiction, but also becoming a workaholic, right? There's many different things. Sometimes those things are valued by society, right? Working a lot, that's a badge of honor. Whereas, having addictions is not necessarily a badge of honor in our society, but they can all be coping mechanisms that we learned when we were kids, survival strategies, to deal with different traumatic events. And that's the thing, they're all in our body, right? And a lot of times people get stuck in certain states of hyper arousal, for example, this idea that they're always in danger, they're always ready for a fight, or
always
to
in
fight
fight or
something.
flight mode. It drains your adrenals, and most people don't actually wake up to start looking at this. I certainly didn't until I was pretty much almost burnt out.
Until your body is screaming.
Yep.
Right. And a lot of
most
people
will find that they'll get to burnout, or a relationship will explode, or something will become explosive, or it's triggered by some big loss. We've gone through, I think, as a collective here in the last 2 years with this COVID, oh my gosh, so much, loss of connection, community, loss of freedom, changes in relationships and locations and jobs. It has really triggered the F out of everyone. And I think that there's not more important work right now on this planet to be done than, know thyself. Like, hey, really know thyself. And, how can you be the best you can be for you, for your family, in your relationships? And what I realized through this journey is that, these traumas that we carry in the body, they actually become the lens. You see your whole life, all of your relationships are based on this. And so if I was rescuing a lot in my marriage, guess where else I rescued a lot in my business as well, with the people that I had on my team.
It's a pattern. It's a pattern of relating.
Yeah. Pattern of, absolutely. So you change one pattern and the whole dominoes, everything changes. Yeah. It can be I'm going to speak honestly, it can be almost traumatic at how rapid, especially if your identity is tied to, a marriage, a relationship, a job, a business, a career, who are you without that thing? And I really did some big soul searching, deep dive, and I'm so grateful, who you become through this journey, wholeness. I'm not perfect by any stretch of the means. I just
none of us are. We're growing. Exactly. One of the other
So
things that you were saying, I'm sorry, just one second, about people don't pay attention until their body starts screaming, right? This idea of different diseases. The amount of people that I see that come to me with these sort of chronic, undiagnosed gastrointestinal issues,
mystery
migraines,
disease.
chronic fatigue, what it's really I would say not interesting, but it's alarming. You're like, whoa. And of course, most people, most people are looking for, or what doctors are giving, is more about medicine, this and that. But when they start to look, a lot of these people that I work with, it's chronic trauma. These were people that really had to disassociate, to deal with whatever was happening in their home lives often. So you see how it literally manifests in the body. We're saying, oh yeah, it's stored in the body, but then you see when it's not released in some sort of way, it's exploding in different types of, in different parts of the body with different issues.
I remember
So
before I got divorced, there was 3 years in a row. Well, actually, even after I got divorced, 3 springs. It's funny because I got married in the spring in March. And then the year after I got married, my neck gave out. I was doing CrossFit training and I thought, oh, it's the CrossFit training. But no, it was not. The next year, the same thing happened. The year after that, it happened again. And it would literally put me out for months where I would have to walk at a 90-degree angle, lie down, pumped up on painkillers all day long. And it would take like 6 months to mend. This year, thankfully, is the first year it has not happened. Working with a chiropractor, and really doing, being much more attentive to these different parts of myself, right? The inner child, the wounded inner self, tuning in with myself, learning how to not abandon myself. I think this is really the biggest key, is bringing awareness to this, the ways that we abandon self in order to have somebody else rescue us, love us the way that we need to love ourselves. And it's either the adult, loving, whole, loving adult self running the train, or it's that wounded inner child. And most people just are not aware of that. I mean, they don't teach us this in school. What the hell do they teach us in school? Not very much. Anything that's really important, effective, or accurate for living a healthy, whole, emotionally sound life. So do you do work with women about, the recalibration and like reintegration of these different parts of ourselves, about the inner child? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
yeah, I think
We talked about trauma being stuck in the body, dancing, movement, breath work. I know you use a lot of creativity, ways to help people connect with their self, but can you just touch a little bit about these different parts?
Yeah. So I think the inner parts work is huge, right? Because this idea of really integrating all the parts of ourselves, because so often, we're pushing away, certain parts of ourselves because we think they're wrong, they're bad. We let our inner critic, run the show. We neglect parts of ourselves, right? And with our inner child, that's normally a term that people are, I think, more getting to talk about a little bit more, but also our, inner teenager, all these different parts of us that we might have different, shame or different, stories or parts that, traumas or neglect or whatever it is, trying to figure out how we can bring them together and integrate them, and hold them and meet them and give them what they need. Right.
Yeah, because there's a lot of power in your dark shadows. This is what I found, whenever there were particular days where I didn't want to have the feeling, or I didn't want to feel the feeling, and I eventually just let myself, okay, here we go. It's all coming out, here's just the wrath of like emotional onslaught of big feelings or big tears or whatever it was. The next day, holy smokes, would I ever have the best day of my life? Like embodied, alive, access to all of that, because it takes a lot of energy to suppress and to hold in the feelings.
And
And I think for people, I don't know if this was, maybe like I was shunned, I was punished if I had anything other than like, just shut your mouth and be quiet and be clammy, happy. If there was any kind of emotion out of me, mostly it was anger when I was young, it was, I'm going to disown you. I'm going to cut you out of the will. If you have, oh my God, you can say that to like a 9-year-old. So that's just like abuse and trauma, right? Not that I'm saying my whole life is based on that event, but it kind of runs your life. That wounded inner child part of you does run your life until it's integrated. So I'm really happy to hear that you do that inner parts work with people, because it's who would I always say this, like, who would want to sabotage themselves, right? But it's so unconscious. And it's not just in relationships. I mean, this is about business. This is about entrepreneurship. Think of how many women have come and said, oh my gosh, I'd love to do what you do, Vanessa. I'd love to empower people. I'd love to be a coach and make all this money and all this freedom and live my purpose and da, 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 da. But I can't seem to be visible, like, oh, I got these visibility blocks, or it's everywhere, right? It permeates your entire being. And we could talk about this for like ever and ever, but I want to really give you an opportunity. It's such an interesting conversation. There's so many layers.
Yeah, there are.
How can people find you, Danielle, if they want to work with you? How can people work with you? Talk to us a little bit about, what you're excited about right now, what you're offering people, and ways people can connect with you.
Yeah. Before I say that, I just wanted to, thinking about the parts work, one of the tools that I think is really amazing as well to access the different parts of ourselves and to express it is through movement and dance. I know you said that you love to dance, you love to move, and using art to draw collages, because there's something about artistically expressing things. Sometimes we give ourselves more permission, right, to give space and to let the inner child express what they need to express. And then, coming in with maybe a creative visualization or a meditation, to give the child whatever the child needed, or the teenager, or, whatever, talk to our inner critic. I find that these creative, avenues are a great way to access more directly some parts that sometimes we put them so far down there, deep down in the dungeon, that it's a great way to access it. And then in terms of your questions of working with people, right? I'm excited about a few things actually at the moment. So one of the things that I'm very excited about, which I'm going to launch at the end of this month, I think it's May 30th, is a new one-on-one coaching program, right? And that's my Wild, Creative, and Free program. It's a 3-month.
Danielle, come back. Kind of went on a froze. Danielle, come back. Let's see if she jumps back on here in a minute. Can you guys all still hear me and see me? Comment here in the chat. Let me know. Hopefully it's not my internet. Let's see if anybody here responds. Let me know. I'm going to go and see here in the Facebook group. Yes, Linda, you can hear me. Carla, okay. Yeah, so Danielle's camera's off. Let's see if she just jumps back in here in a minute. And while we're waiting for her to jump back in, go ahead and drop any questions that you guys might have for me here, or Danielle, while we're just waiting for her to jump back on. She's probably got some. It's great to see all you rock stars. Renee's here in the Facebook group. Lisa, Kelly, Roberts, Pamela Dana's in the house. It's great to see you rock stars.
What happened? I dropped, huh?
Yeah, it's okay. Don't worry about it. It's okay. You're back. Let me just pop you back in the spotlight. Add spot. Ta-da! Now on the other side of you. Okay,
magic.
Okay, so you were telling us about what you're offering. What's your website? Can you drop it here in the chat?
Yes,
first?
Let me do that right now. So I think where it cut off, if I'm not wrong, was the online group. Is that when you stopped hearing me? Probably.
Yeah.
So the online group sessions, it's going to be a small, intimate group, right? You know, just not a lot of people, so I can see everyone very well. And I'm going to be mixing the expressive arts work with somatic experiencing and different techniques, but it's going to be a lot of dancing and a lot of art making. So I'm very, very excited about that. You know, it's basically a 6-week series all about embodiment and creativity. There's also the one-on-one sessions with me, which are just, you know, connect and express. And then I also just started a Facebook group last week, I think, or yeah, Friday, which is Wild, Creative, and Free Community. So that's also like, you know, a free group on Facebook where I'll be posting lots of different information around all the things that we're talking about today. So I think that's a good place, you know, to get more info. And I can also put here, you know, my my Instagram, right?
Yeah,
Different
let's
ways
drop
people
all
contact
the
me.
links.
Okay, I'll do the Facebook and email. And if somebody wants to do a discovery call, which is just a free kind of consult call where we chat for about 30 minutes to see what, you know, if we would be a good fit working together, I can also put that here.
I love it. You've got all the links. So there's a website, there's an IG, there's a Facebook group, there's your email address, and there's a place where people can book a free strategy call.
Yeah.
I think your group program sounds totally freaking rad. I'm actually just cleaning out some space in my garage. I ordered my stripper pole, so that's going in.
Oh
yeah. Super
love
excited
it.
about that. Yeah, because you know, when we heal, when we really, you know, face our feelings and have the courage to show up for ourselves the way that didn't happen when we were kids, and we become our own mothers, you know, our own fathers. When we, what was the word? Not recalibrate, but integrate, you know, those parts of ourselves, integrate the shadow. We also have access to the light. We have access to so much more energy. It's available to us now, and it naturally is creative and expressive.
Yeah.
It's what happens naturally. So, so there's kind of like two ways, like there's so many ways in. You could use breath work, you know, you could use movement, dance, creativity, expression. So anyways, turning my garage into like goddess palace. Stripper poles ordered, should be here in the next 10 days. And then I have some really beautiful space, some tables that I'm setting up actually to do some artwork.
Beautiful.
So
yeah, it nourishes. I think for me at least, dance and art and all that, there's spaces of nourishment, right? There's spaces where you can really just connect with yourself, nourish yourself, move in ways that it feels good, you know? And I think that is so healing and so powerful. And I think the more we integrate all these different parts of ourselves, the more powerful we feel, right? The more we're really, you know, being authentic, and we're being
fully expressed
whole.
at 100%.
Yeah.
You're not living life at 50% or 35% of who you really are. You're living life fully expressed, and it feels really, really good.
And you feel more alive.
And it's also quite a journey, because you're going to lose some people on that journey. I was listening to this really awesome, I don't know if you guys followed TD Jakes, but I was listening to one of his interviews from 4 years ago called Soar, like building yourself up from the ground up. And he was talking about, you know, somebody, they were asking, because he wrote this best-selling book. This is a great interview. I posted on my Facebook here this morning. And he was saying, somebody was asking, like, you know, what did it cost you? You know, he's like, he used to be he's a pastor, obviously, but he's so much more than that. He's, you know, film producer, best-selling author, like it just goes on and on and on. What did it cost you to get there? You know, and he was quoting the story of somebody who says like absolutely everything. You know, so it's not a journey for the faint-hearted, you know, to become fully expressed, fully embodied, whole. So worth it. So worth it.
Totally worth it. But it's not necessarily poof, you know? And the idea that when we do this kind of work, we're really honoring all the parts of ourselves, all of ourselves, our journey, and even, you know, where we come from and all that kind of stuff. And I think we can find so much more ease in our physical bodies, and also peace within ourselves. Peace. And power, you know, there's so many things. Mm-hmm.
In this surrendered place, you know, I think that was really for me what I was after was peace. You know, I lived my life, you know, highly caffeinated, full on, you know, who am I with all these millions of dollars helping all these women? Who gives a shit, you know, if my life isn't, you know, if you're just running around like a chicken with your head cut off all day long, who cares? So peace for me was a really big part of this puzzle. And, you know, I would have never looked at, in my 30s, I've been like, peace, you know, let's go after wealth. Let's go after, you know, it was a kind of a trip. But I had a lot to prove, you know, I was proving myself. I got nothing left to prove to anybody anymore. And let me tell you what, it feels fucking great. I'm not having this conversation to prove anything to anybody. I'm having this conversation to share, you know,
comes from a very different place.
Yeah. And this wholeness that we're talking about here today, it's quite a journey. It's not for the faint-hearted. Don't try this at home, you know, by yourselves, folks. You know, don't try this alone. Find a community, find support, find an expert, contact Danielle. She's a rock star with this. And then of course, make sure that you subscribe to her website, you know, connect with her, because I know that you're doing some retreats also in Brazil. We were talking last week about that.
Yeah, I had a retreat this past weekend, which was beautiful.
So if you want more in-person work, that's available for you too. But find community, find a place where you, you know, can be seen and heard and held in this process of healing. You deserve it. Love yourself. You are worth it. Love yourself. Learn how to love yourself. You are worth it. And know it's, you know, there's nothing wrong with you if you have to learn how to love yourself at 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years old. Begin, right? Journey of 1,000 steps starts with the first one. And I think I'm just going to continue doing more of these interviews. I think I'm going to call them Radical Intimacy, this kind of series. A radical intimacy series about all the things, you know, we're going to talk about sexuality, relationships, healing, loving yourself, you know, wholeness, all the things that really interest me right now. So I just want to say thank you, Danielle, for showing up here, sharing your gifts, sharing your wisdom with the community. Thank you, each and every one of you rock stars here that showed up live on the call. If you're watching the replay, if you're here in the Facebook group, catching the replay on YouTube, then we'll make sure to post all the links here below, and share this maybe with a soul sister, a friend, somebody who might need some understanding, inspiration, just a safe place to land. And I love you. Have an amazing day, rock stars.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Vanessa. I loved it. And I love the idea of doing more calls, radical, intimate conversations. I think we all need these kind of spaces, and community is so important. You know, we're mammals, right? We co-regulate. So this idea of safe spaces where we can be with other people, where we feel seen and heard and not judged, is so essential for healing. So I support you 100%.
Yeah, girl. Thank you. And just want to make sure everyone grabs the links here in the chat before we end today. And I'll make sure I post them over in Facebook. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, everyone. See you at the next perfect time. Big hugs.
Beijos.
Beijos.